A Christmas Wish by Audrey Sinclair. So the quaint village of Evergreen Falls lay nestled in a picturesque valley, its charm amplified by the pristine blanket of snow that had fallen overnight. As dawn broke on that crisp December morning, the sun's rays danced across the frozen landscape, casting a warm glow on the snow-capped roofs of the century-old stone cottages. The air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the mingled scents of pine, cinnamon, and wood smoke, a symphony of aromas that heralded the approaching Christmas season. Amelia Winslow stood at the frost-kissed window of her family's Victorian home, her hazel eyes taking in the familiar sight of Evergreen Falls coming to life. The cobblestone streets, usually alive with the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages and the chatter of townsfolk, were now muffled by the thick layer of snow. Yet, even in this hushed state, there was an undercurrent of excitement. Christmas was mere days away, and the town was abuzz with preparations. At 22, Amelia was a vision of grace and beauty. Her chestnut hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that was both delicate and determined. She had a kind smile that could light up a room and a quick wit that made her a favorite among the townspeople. But today, as she watched children scampering through the snow and shopkeepers hanging wreaths on their doors, Amelia's usual sparkle was dimmed by a shadow of melancholy. Her slender fingers traced the outline of a snowflake on the window pane, a habit she'd had since childhood. But now, the gesture felt tinged with a bittersweet longing. For the past 3 years, Christmas had been a time of hope and disappointment for Amelia, each year renewing and then dashing her most fervent wish. That wish had a name: Henry Collins. Henry had been more than just Amelia's childhood friend. He had been her confidant, her partner in adventures, and as they grew older, the keeper of her heart. They had grown up together in Evergreen Falls, their lives as intertwined as the ivy that climbed the town hall's weathered brick walls. Everyone in town had assumed they would marry one day. Everyone, it seemed, except Henry himself. 3 Christmases ago, Henry had left Evergreen Falls, driven by ambition and a desire to make his mark on the world. He had dreams of becoming a successful businessman in the city, of proving himself worthy of Amelia's hand. Their parting had been bittersweet, filled with promises of letters and a swift return. "I'll make you proud, Amelia," Henry had said, his warm brown eyes shining with determination. "And when I come back, I'll have built a future for us." Amelia had wanted to tell him that she was already proud, that she didn't need a grand future, just him. But the words had caught in her throat, strangled by the lump of emotion that threatened to spill over into tears. Instead, she had simply nodded, pressing a small locket into his hand. "To remember me by," she had whispered. In the first year after Henry's departure, letters had flowed between them like a river of hope and dreams. Amelia would rush to meet the postman each day, her heart soaring at the sight of Henry's neat handwriting. His letters spoke of the bustling city life, of opportunities and challenges, but always circled back to his love for her and his plans for their future. But as time passed, the letters became less frequent. The river of correspondence slowed to a trickle, and then, almost a year ago, it had stopped entirely. Amelia had written faithfully for months, her letters becoming increasingly desperate pleas for any word from Henry. But silence was the only response she received. Now, as another Christmas approached, Amelia found herself caught between hope and heartache. She had prayed fervently that this would be the year Henry would return, fulfilling the promise he had made so long ago. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, that hope flickered like a candle in the wind. A gentle knock at the door pulled Amelia from her reverie. "Amelia, darling," her mother's voice called softly, "would you help me with the garlands in the parlor?" Amelia took a deep breath, pushing aside her melancholy thoughts. She smoothed her skirts and turned from the window, forcing a smile onto her face. "Of course, Mother, I'll be right there." The Winslow family parlor was a picture of festive cheer. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. The air was rich with the scent of cinnamon and cloves, emanating from the bowl of potpourri on the mantel. In the corner stood a magnificent fir tree, its branches laden with hand-carved wooden ornaments, strings of cranberries, and small candles waiting to be lit on Christmas Eve. Amelia's younger sister, Emma, a sprightly girl of 16, was perched precariously on a ladder, attempting to drape garlands around the upper branches of the tree. Their father, a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, was carefully arranging candles in each window, a tradition meant to guide weary travelers home. "There you are, my dear," Mrs. Winslow said, her face lighting up as Amelia entered the room. She held out a length of red ribbon. "Would you help me tie these bows? You always had a knack for making them look just right." Amelia nodded, taking the ribbon and settling herself on the plush window seat. As her fingers worked deftly, creating perfect, symmetrical bows, she allowed herself to be drawn into the warmth of her family's enthusiasm. She didn't want them to worry, especially not during Christmas. They had all worked so hard to make the holiday special, and she was determined to be a part of it, even if her heart wasn't fully present. "Oh, Amelia," Emma chirped from her perch on the ladder. "Did you hear? The Johnsons are hosting a grand Christmas Eve ball this year. Everyone in town is invited." Miss Winslow clapped her hands in delight. "How wonderful. It's been years since we've had a proper Christmas ball in Evergreen Falls. We must make sure your gowns are ready, girls." Amelia managed a small smile. "That sounds lovely, Mother." Her father, ever perceptive, noticed the lack of enthusiasm in her voice. He came over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It might do you good to attend, sweetheart. A night of dancing and merriment could lift your spirits." Amelia looked up at her father, seeing the concern in his eyes. She knew her family had noticed her melancholy, though they had been kind enough not to press her about it. "You're right, Father," she said, mustering more cheer into her voice. "I'm sure it will be a delightful evening." As the day wore on, Amelia threw herself into the Christmas preparations with renewed vigor. She helped her mother bake gingerbread cookies, their spicy aroma filling the kitchen. She assisted Emma in wrapping gifts, their laughter echoing through the house as they playfully argued over the best way to tie a bow. For a few hours, she almost forgot the ache in her heart. But as evening fell and the family gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and sipping hot cocoa, Amelia found her thoughts drifting once again to Henry. She wondered where he was, what he was doing. Was he thinking of her too? Did he remember the promises they had made? That night, as she lay in bed, Amelia allowed herself to indulge in memories. She remembered the summer picnics by the lake, where she and Henry would spend hours talking about their dreams for the future. She recalled the winter evenings they had spent ice skating on the frozen pond, Henry's strong hands steadying her when she wobbled. Most of all, she remembered their last Christmas together, when Henry had kissed her under the mistletoe at the town square, a kiss that had felt like a promise of forever. Tears slipped silently down Amelia's cheeks as she clutched her pillow. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "please let him come home." The days leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. Evergreen Falls transformed into a winter wonderland, with evergreen garlands adorning every lamppost and storefront. The town square boasted a magnificent Christmas tree, its branches twinkling with hundreds of tiny candles. Children built snowmen and engaged in spirited snowball fights, their laughter a joyous counterpoint to the somber tolling of the church bells. Amelia threw herself into the festivities with determination, helping to organize the annual Christmas bazaar and volunteering at the orphanage to ensure every child had a gift to open on Christmas morning. But even as she smiled and laughed with her neighbors, a part of her remained distant, always watching, always hoping for a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered for the evening church service. The small stone church was aglow with candlelight, its stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the pews. As Amelia sat with her family, listening to the choir's angelic rendition of Silent Night, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever happened, she realized she was blessed with the love of her family and her community. After the service, everyone made their way to the Johnson estate for the grand Christmas ball. The mansion was resplendent, decorated with thousands of twinkling lights and fragrant garlands. Inside, the ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gleaming decorations. Amelia, dressed in a gown of deep emerald velvet that complemented her eyes, found herself swept up in the festivities. She danced with her father, laughed with her friends, and even managed to enjoy herself despite the constant reminder of Henry's absence. As the clock neared midnight, she stepped out onto the balcony for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear and cold, the stars twinkling brilliantly in the inky sky. Amelia leaned against the railing, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She closed her eyes, allowing the sounds of the party to fade away, and made one last desperate wish. "Amelia?" Her eyes flew open, her heart leaping into her throat. That voice, it couldn't be. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, she turned around. There, standing in the doorway of the balcony, was Henry Collins. He looked different from the boy who had left Evergreen Falls 3 years ago. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, with a hint of stubble on his jaw. But his eyes, those warm, kind eyes that had always seen straight into her soul, were exactly the same. "Henry?" Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" He stepped forward, the moonlight illuminating his face. "It's me, Amelia. I'm home." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they rushed into each other's arms. Amelia buried her face in Henry's chest, inhaling the familiar scent of him, pine and leather and something uniquely Henry. His arms tightened around her, and she felt the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. "I can't believe you're here," Amelia said, her voice muffled by his jacket. "I've waited so long." Henry pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." Amelia shook her head, unable to form words. All the hurt and longing of the past 3 years seemed to melt away in the warmth of Henry's gaze. "I owe you an explanation," Henry said softly. "Will you walk with me?" Amelia nodded, and they slipped away from the party, making their way down to the snow-covered gardens. As they walked, their breath mingling in the cold air, Henry began to speak. "When I left for the city, I had such grand plans," he said. "I was going to make my fortune and come back a man worthy of you. But they didn't go as I'd hoped. The city was harder, colder than I'd imagined. I struggled to find my footing." Amelia listened silently, her hand tucked into the crook of Henry's arm. "I was too proud to admit my failures," Henry continued. "I couldn't bear the thought of returning to you empty-handed. So I threw myself into my work, determined to succeed, and eventually things started to turn around. But by then, the letters had stopped." Amelia finished for him. Henry nodded, his expression pained. "I convinced myself that you must have moved on, that someone as wonderful as you would surely have found someone else. I was a coward, Amelia. I was afraid to reach out, afraid of what I might learn." They had reached a small gazebo, its white-painted lattice sparkling with frost. Henry turned to face Amelia, taking both her hands in his. "But I couldn't stay away," he said. "No matter how successful I became, no matter how much I tried to forget, my heart was always here in Evergreen Falls. With you." Amelia felt tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Henry," she breathed, "I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Henry's face lit up with hope. "Do you mean that? Even after everything?" In response, Amelia reached up and pulled him down into a kiss. It was a kiss 3 years in the making, filled with all the love, longing, and forgiveness that words could not express. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "I love you, Amelia Winslow," Henry said, his forehead resting against hers. "I've loved you since we were children, and I'll love you for the rest of my days. Will you marry me?" Joy bloomed in Amelia's heart, as bright and beautiful as the Christmas star. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. As the church bells began to toll, signaling the arrival of Christmas Day, Henry slipped a delicate ring onto Amelia's finger. It was his grandmother's ring, he explained, the one he had always planned to give her. Hand in hand, they made their way back to the party, where their return was met with cheers and congratulations. Amelia's parents embraced Henry like a long-lost son, while Emma squealed with delight at the news of their engagement. As the celebration continued around them, Amelia and Henry stood by the Christmas tree, lost in their own world. The candlelight flickered, casting a warm glow on their faces as they swayed gently to the music. "Merry Christmas, my love," Henry murmured, pressing a kiss to Amelia's temple. Amelia smiled, her heart full to bursting with happiness. Her Christmas wish had come true in the most magical way possible. As she looked up at Henry, seeing all their hopes and dreams reflected in his eyes, she knew that this was just the beginning of their happily ever after. "Merry Christmas, Henry," she replied softly. "Welcome home." And as the snow fell gently outside, blanketing Evergreen Falls in a fresh layer of white, Amelia and Henry sealed their love with another kiss, a promise of all the Christmases yet to come, filled with love, joy, and the magic of being together.